What's up, everybody? Thank you all for joining another episode of Entrepreneurial Appetite. I'm excited because this is the first of many special episodes dedicated to Black entrepreneurs who are in the tech space, who are founders. And I'm excited because y'all know, like, I'm a hardcore North Carolina A&T Aggie. And it just so happens in my journey of life, listen, I find these folks who graduated from A&T who are doing amazing things. And it's not just because they went to, I mean, part of it is rooted in the fact that they came from A&T. But even if you didn't go to A&T, Anthony, I would still be looking at you like, yo, you're doing some dope stuff. And so Anthony, like y'all don't know this, but Dr. Anthony Kinslow, do you go by Junior or the second?
The second.
The second. Went to A&T, got a bachelor's degree in civil engineering, and went on to get his PhD and master's degree from Stanford University in civil engineering and sustainable design. And what's interesting is, like, I know him from, I think, are they your auntie, uncle, cousin, or what?
It's my big cousin.
Okay, from his big cousins, Dr. Diana Berry and Lisbon Berry. They're a couple, and Dr. Berry is a historian, and she's like dean of UC, one of them UC colleges. I can't remember off the top of my head, but she used to work at UT Austin where I was getting my doctorate, and she's been a guest on a podcast in our first season about her book, A Black Women's History of the United States. And so I want to just give Anthony this opportunity to talk about who he is, what he's doing. How did you become a civil engineer? And just based upon what I've read about you, like, are you a civil engineer and an environmentalist? Like, are you both of those things in one? And if you think of yourself in that way, like, how did you become who you are at that intersection of environmentalism and civil engineering?
Yeah, no, appreciate you. This is first off, hold on, I got to start it off right. Aggie Pride.
Aggie Pride, that's right.
So, yeah, it's funny when you ask me how did I become a civil engineer. Uh, in fact, Dinah's father was a civil engineer, and he was, I believe, the first Black civil engineer professor at UC Davis.
Wow.
And so him and my Aunt Belle, his wife, were always kind of like, this is who I want to be when I grow up, right? They were living overseas and traveling and doing all these amazing things. And when I got to college, my great uncle said, hey, you like people and you like math, you should do civil engineering. And it was just that simple for me. I had no real inclination of what I wanted to do going into college. I just knew I was supposed to be going to college.
That's right.
And so civil engineering just kind of, okay, I'll give it a try. And it ended up being something I love. I love the idea of being able to combine technology and structures and engineering concepts with humanity.
Yeah.
And that's really what civil engineering is. And so when you ask me if I'm also an environmentalist and a civil engineer, I guess yes, but I would say to be a great civil engineer, you also have to be an environmentalist, right? For me, you have to be able to understand the impacts that the environment is going to have on the structures that you're building, that you're constructing. And at the same time, you have to understand the impact that your structures are going to have on the environment and society.
Yeah.
And so that for me is like kind of a core of being an environmentalist is recognizing those impacts and designing and building for those impacts.
Yeah.
Or to mitigate impacts in some cases.
So I find that interesting that your great uncle said that you like people and you like math, so do civil engineering. And this podcast is being recorded like way before it's being released. I had a conversation with a fellow Aggie at Afrotech like 2 or 3 days ago, and she's getting her PhD from Hopkins. And she's talking about how she's in a lab. She's biomedical engineer. She's in a lab, and she's like, man, these professors in these labs, like, they care more about the science than they do to people. And she's talking about the toxic environments in these labs
Mhm.
that she's been working
Mhm.
in, and she's persevered through that. But it's 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 ruined her for academia. Like she
Yes.
does not want to work in
Yes.
academia. So my next question to you is, and it's interesting, I'm thinking about that, is like why choose to start your own business, which is Gemini Energy Solutions, instead of going into the academy or deciding to become an employee?
Right. And so I gotta give you, all your flowers for going in that route. But I'm kind of in the same boat as her. Academia, it, it, it is a very, I'll use the word vicious space. It has the
Mm,
potential to be a very vicious space, right?
yeah.
People talk about Wall Street and these kind of things. I'm like, academia is on that level where,
Mm,
where it's just, there's a lot of egos.
yeah.
Uh, there's oftentimes not an appreciation of what your work, how your work can impact people. Kind of the ivory tower,
Yeah.
sitting on the ivory tower, the white tower, or whatever, and you're talking and how people talk, how people engage. It's like they're separate from the
Yeah.
rest of rest of
Yeah.
us, right? I say us, even though I'm kind of in that position with a PhD, also, right? Like I can be in those spaces, I can move through those spaces. I just don't like to, quite
Yeah.
frankly.
Yeah.
Um, and I do want to make a point that I think there's something about Aggies, folks that went to A&T, and how they look at whatever work they're in, and
Yeah.
how it's connected to people, and the
Yeah.
importance of people generally, but also our people, right? And
Yeah.
understanding that uh, uh, you know Black folks in America, or folks racialized as Black in America, are fundamentally disadvantaged, right? Are kept from things, are have monies and taken from us, have access denied. Like
Mhm.
this is a daily occurrence,
Yeah.
and so when we're in these spaces and we see the amount of privilege, the amount of money, the amount of opportunity in this space, and at the same time the conversations never really seem to connect to the realities that we see and that we know our
Yeah.
families see. I mean, that's a hard thing to stomach. That's a hard thing to take and then still want to stay into that space.
Yeah. So this is a critique someone may have. Dr. Kinslow Jr., it seems like you come from a family of black folk that have been like well off. You know, what are you talking about?
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I think even for us, like even a black person who would like offer that critique, right?
Yep.
I don't think like personally, I didn't understand the wealth gap until I got to grad school at UT Austin.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Because like I grew up thoroughly middle class, dare I say upper middle class.
Mhm.
But the wealth, that the institutional wealth and the systemic wealth that is wrapped up in whiteness is on a whole like
It's not even
other
close.
level. Like when you see the way that money is wasted, is wasted
Yeah.
on things that aren't people in white institutions, it's mind blowing. And so I would just offer that for the person who had the knee jerk reaction critique. Well, look at Dr. Kinslow, look at you, Dr. Clark. Like y'all are doing well. Yes, we are, but the
We're doing well by Black standards.
yes,
I think that's
yes,
like
that's what it
it's
is.
horrible to say it like that, but the
Yeah,
realities are the average wealth of a Black household in America is 1/10 that of the average white person,
yeah,
right? A white household. And so when you take that into account, we could be an upper echelon and still not even be average for
yeah,
a white person. Like
yeah,
and so and it's interesting. I have diversity in my family from a socioeconomic standpoint. I
yeah,
have individuals who, and I think being Black in America means that is the case for you. Right?
absolutely.
There's no
Yeah,
Black family that just all got wealthy people. You got folks who've done really well, doctors, lawyers, etc., and you got folks who been incarcerated. You got folks who just never been out of Section 8 housing, or just middle low income, right?
mm-hmm,
Never had owned their own home, right? Like this is just the diversity that is exists within our
Yeah.
households. And quite frankly, something that I tell my mentees when they're going into the higher academia space is there's going to start to feel like a gap
Mm.
between you and the people in your community that you were at before. And like because your reality is what you're experiencing, what you're seeing, and them and you being away from them, that's going to create some distance. And you
Yeah.
got to work hard to keep them in your circle because it's important for them to be in your circle.
Yeah. For sure. And so how do you see your founding, or do you see your founding of Gemini Solutions as an opportunity for you to stay more closely tied to the diversity that exists within Black community, more so than what maybe an opportunity to work in academia would give? Like, is there a connection between you going the entrepreneurship route and wanting to stay connected to like all types of Black diversity that exists in the United States and maybe even globally?
That's a great kind of observation, and I don't think I've ever articulated it like that, but I think that did have a lot to do with it, right? I early on understood that getting a PhD was in part not just enjoyed research, but in part it was so that no one could tell me I wasn't qualified for something,
Yeah.
right? And quite honestly, if we didn't have the racism and the injustices and the historical kind of precedent that we have in this country, I may not have ever gotten a PhD.
Mm.
Right, I enjoy research, but maybe not enough to have gone and
Yeah.
done a PhD
Yeah.
if it didn't also seem to be something that I thought would open doors and create opportunities for me. And as I put it, um, e- have me educated enough to make impact on the scale that I wanted to make impact on.
Yeah.
And so entrepreneurship for me is my ability to make impact. And it isn't the only way I want to make impact. I do want to go into academia eventually.
Mm.
I want to go into politics eventually,
Mm.
right? I want to have impact in these different realms, but I saw entrepreneurship as kind of that first step for me of where I wanted to first connect and who I wanted to help in that in doing so.
Yeah. So I looked at your slide deck in preparation for the interview, and you had some compelling stats about Black communities and what I would consider environmental injustices.
Hmm.
So talk about some of the things that you recognized as these injustices that exist, and how your business Gemini Solutions works to alleviate some of these injustices.
Yeah. So the three main stats that I have in there was that Black communities are 3 times more likely, or Black people are 3 times more likely to die from exposure to airborne pollutants.
Hmm.
That's one. Black communities are 69% less likely to contain rooftop solar,
Mm.
and Black people are 4 times more likely to suffer power outages.
Yeah,
Right, and there's a lot more statistics you could throw at it. You could talk
for
about
sure.
not just power outages, but shutoffs. Right, the frequency of shutoffs
Mm.
uh, higher in Black households, and it's not be and this is even when you control for non-payments. So they're more likely to shut off a Black household fundamentally sooner than they are a white household,
Oh,
right? And they being utilities, right?
right.
And so like there in every aspects of society, there's a statistic like that.
Wow.
And so for me, I honestly didn't realize this. Just like the you talked about the wealth gap getting to grad school. I didn't realize that there was a race issue in the clean energy space until I got to grad school. Because
Mm.
at A&T, there's plenty of Black people who are in the clean energy space, in the environmental space, and were
Right.
caring about this stuff, right?
Yeah.
And and I also didn't realize how bad it was. I understood the social injustices.
Yeah.
I didn't understand the environmental injustices
It's deep.
and how they're so closely linked.
Yeah.
Right. And
Yeah.
so for me, Gemini Energy Solutions, what we are is a catalyzer. And in
Mm.
chemistry, a catalyzer is an agent that increases the velocity of a reaction without changing the end result or the end product.
Mm.
And in the layman's terms, we are accelerating or increasing the velocity of our clean energy transition by making it easier for Black and brown people to be involved in the clean energy transition. So that's like at a bare minimum what Gemini Energy Solutions is was founded to do and what it's working to do.
Yeah. So talk like why is I was just wondering like how does the power failure thing like even happen? Because like to me, the power going off is not something that happens on like a regular basis for anybody. But maybe for some folks it is depending on where you live. And I live in Texas, so we had what they call snowmageddon, which shouldn't have been as bad as I. Anyways, I'm not gonna go there. But people's power went out, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so like how I guess make the connection for me about how that's like a huge like why would that be one of the three major stats that you would put on the slide deck?
Yeah. So there's two reasons for that. First, why is this happening?
Mm-hmm.
And there's two very easy or simple reasons. The first is that when you think about the technology, you think about wires, right? They are moving electricity to your home.
Yeah.
Well, just like anything, you have to maintain them,
Mm,
right? You
yeah.
you have to uh, sometimes upgrade them, and utilities have a you know they choose how often they do that, and how often they do that in some neighborhoods are less frequent than how often they do it in other neighborhoods.
Yeah.
So if a tree falls down, or if limbs aren't cut away from the lines, or these kind of things, um, you simply just are more likely to have outages because of that,
Yeah.
right? So it's simply a maintenance issue on one hand.
Right.
On the other hand is divestment from infrastructure within majority Black communities is a standard across this country. I mean,
Yeah.
Jackson, Mississippi, in the water,
Yeah.
that is that is straight from not putting money into fixing up and putting in new infrastructure.
Right.
And so that's what you're having happen in cities across the country, is that they're just not putting money into new infrastructure. I mean, my wife is from Germany, and she's shocked to see that we still have lines above ground.
Yeah.
Like, you think about all these
Yeah.
hurricanes, tornadoes, everything, fires, all this is happening, and we have lines up in the air as opposed to in the ground. And it's just like other countries are just like, what are y'all doing?
Yeah.
Like, what the hell? But we haven't updated our infrastructure.
It's old school.
Mhm. So
Dang.
that's the why. Why I put it in my deck is because we are um, directly trying to solve that issue by creating what we're calling resilient revenue generating microgrids.
Okay.
And this is distinctly different than kind of a resilient hub. A resilient hub is something that is solar storage, and when the grid goes down, you're able to maintain power because you got the solar and the storage, right? And
Right.
so getting more and more. Uh, uh, that's been getting more and more backing, getting more and more interest in the industry is resiliency hubs. And people understand that Black communities are more likely to suffer outages, so that a lot of people are trying to go into these communities to offer resiliency hubs.
Yeah.
And my thing was, that's nice and all, but that's not enough,
Mm.
right? Because I understand the environmental injustices and the social injustices and how closely they're linked, I recognize that just being able to keep the lights on is great, it's important, but it's not enough,
Yeah.
right? These communities need more money flown into them. And so this is where the revenue generating part comes into play.
Okay.
And so what we are developing is hubs that not only are resilient when those times when the power outage goes out, but they're generating revenue day in and day out as well from either solar and or electric vehicle charging stations.
Mm. So what I'm hearing you say is this like decentralized electricity?
Yes, we are decentralizing the grid.
Oh.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay. 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 So it's I have you heard of helium?
Company?
Yeah.
I
Helium.
feel like I have, but I couldn't tell you what they do.
So Helium is a company, they're doing like decentralized wireless. And so, like, essentially what you can do is you can buy a box and you can put that box in your house. It does two things, right? It gets long Wi-Fi for IoT stuff, and then it has the radio box, and the radio box provides like 5G wireless. But
Mm,
you buy it, you put it in your house, and they pay you back with a cryptocurrency token. And
okay.
that's how they were able to get their people to buy in because they didn't have the money to like ship it to people. Like that's how they were able to get people to buy into it. They bought the materials, put it in their house, and the impetus for me buying it is to say that like I get the drip of the cryptocurrency like
Mm,
every day as it works, as it's on their blockchain or it makes the connections. I'm not a scientist, so I don't know. I just know I got the boxes in my house. So when I heard you say that, I was thinking about this. So how do you see the communities benefiting from the revenue generation? Is it going to
yeah.
go into like individual homes? Is it going to go into like a grant mechanism or to tax base, or how do you see it paying out in that way?
Yeah. So I think so. What we've done is we've made it so that we call community anchors are the ones that are owning and operating these
Mm,
hubs. So a community anchor for us is a trusted organization that has been active in the community and owns their own property.
yeah.
Right. And so for us, we're saying, hey, they know what the community needs better than we do. Right. So the revenue generation is going to them for them to use to maybe expand their services.
Mm,
One nonprofit that we're working with in South Carolina, Upstate Circle of Friends, they prepare meals for senior citizens throughout their community and drive it to them. They do pickup programs and stuff for the kids of their community and meal programs for kids of the community. Think they did like 20,000 meals over like a 4-month period during the
yeah.
pandemic, right? So they're doing all this great work. They're building food gardens in their on their property, and when they create this clean energy hub, which we just finished the feasibility report for them, they will be able to have revenue generation to expand their services, reach
Mm,
more people, be able to
yeah.
provide those meals for more people. They'll have electric vehicle charging stations, which means that their community can now start to look at purchasing electric
Right.
vehicles because they got a place to charge them,
Right.
right? And so that is one way, that's indirect, but it is a way for one organization that's already been doing work to impact the community with that money.
Right.
A more direct way is that you could have it where the community puts in $10, or someone in the community puts in $10, $20, and all of them all of a sudden have part ownership of this hub and
Right.
are in receiving dividends
Mm,
each year or every quarter from the revenue generation.
right. Hey
Right.
everyone, thank you again for your support of Entrepreneurial Appetite. Beginning this season, we are inviting our listeners to support the show through our Patreon website. The founding 55 patrons will get live access to our monthly discussions for only $5 a month. Your support will help us hire an intern or freelancer to help with the production of the show. Of course, you can also support us by giving us 5 stars, leaving a positive comment, or sharing the show with a few friends. Thank you for your continued support.
Right. So
So
then
let's
that's the
wait,
more
wait, wait,
direct
wait.
way.
So what you're saying is, because I remember on a slide that you had churches on there, right? Picture of a church.
Hmm.
So the church can become your gas station,
Yes.
right? Or, if I own a community center or whatever, like it can become the gas station, and then people in the
Hmm.
community can like, you basically own part of the gas station.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so, like a church, Glad Tidings International in Hayward, California, right? The first project we started, when we looked at what the money they can make upwards of $1 million a year
Mm.
on electric vehicle charging revenue in the spaces that they have. I mean, can you imagine what that type of money could do for that community, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, I mean that's right now what they could be making, but and that's before everybody in California has an electric vehicle.
Yeah. Because it's
Right?
coming. It's
Yeah,
coming.
it's coming. And
Yeah.
Bishop Macklin is a true visionary. He said, "We don't want just a few charging stations. We want to take over one of our whole lots and make it 20 charging stations so the
Yeah.
whole community can use it."
Yeah.
Right? Because they recognize the not just the revenue potential but also the need.
Mm.
What in most of the communities that we focus on what we call Justice 40 communities,
Yeah.
referencing the Justice 40 initiative that the Biden administration launched in 2021. and we say, hey, there's 13,000 plus Justice 40 communities in the country. We want to reach all of them by 2030.
Wow.
And we want every single one of them to have a revenue generating microgrid for their community, whether the community itself owns it or their community anchor owns it and is using that to provide better services for the community. We feel that this is like just one essential step to starting to catalyze our transition to a clean energy future.
So let me ask this question. Define a little bit more what, because I had no idea about Justice 40. That's one of the things I have on my list to ask you. So I'm glad you went there. What is a Justice 40 community?
Yeah, Justice 40 community is essentially a community that has historically been disadvantaged or economically disadvantaged or is overburdened with pollution, whether that be air, water, or soil, or all three.
Mm,
And and the Department of Energy identifies a community as a census tract. So for those unfamiliar, a census tract is essentially kind of a smaller version of a zip code,
mm.
right? So like every zip code has like four numbers after it. If you look at it from like a UPS thing,
Oh yeah, the
that is
extra numbers. The
the
extra
extra
numbers.
numbers
Yes,
after
yes,
the zip
yes.
code. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's articulating your census tract. And there's about 73,000 census tracts in the US. And so of those 73,000, about 13% uh, or a little over 13%, so 13,000 of those are Justice 40 communities, or communities that are overburdened with pollution or or have been historically disadvantaged economically.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of those are Black and brown communities.
Yeah. So it's interesting. You have Justice 40, and then you have this concept of 444. And I was like, that's Jay-Z. So talk about what this 444 means, um and how it relates to the concepts that you've been talking about in Gemini Energy Solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I should also say that those Justice 40 communities include indigenous communities as well,
Yeah.
indigenous lands. So 444 is uh, if we reach every single one of those communities, we will be generating $4 billion annually within those communities,
Mm.
um, 4 gigawatts of solar energy. Um, and for those who don't know how much that is, it's a lot. And 4,000 local full-time jobs in
Yeah.
those communities.
Yeah.
So 444 is kind of what we see as kind of like our goal and something easy to remember for people.
Yeah. Yeah. That's cool. Talk about, so like these are like huge sort of ideas. And I
Hmm.
think like anytime like I read a book from someone who's like a entrepreneur or someone who's a founder, they're always like, I want to reinvent the way we do this. These are like global sort of like ideas and dreams. But these things don't occur like in a vacuum, they don't occur in isolation or on an island. So how are you able to get partners to help you do what it is that you need to do?
Part of it is my personality, right? I
Mm,
get energy from people. So
yeah.
I love to engage with people. I love to talk with people. And so it has been a lot easier in that way to start to have just sitting next to someone and just start talking to them, because I
Yeah.
can't not talk to someone if I'm sitting next to them,
Yeah.
and they end up being focused on something else. And
Mm,
understanding the how things are connected, I can instantly say, oh, what you're focusing on connects to my work in this way.
yeah.
And I would love to talk about how we could, you know, I could bring you into our ecosystem,
Yeah.
because you're focused on Wi-Fi, right? For
Mhm.
instance, that's powerful, because one, the same communities that I'm serving also have issues with high-speed internet,
Yeah.
right? But the other aspect is when you talk about the Internet of Things, right? Or you talk about energy efficiency solutions, a lot of them need Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
Right. So
Facts.
like
Yeah.
all this is connected. So that's just one example. But so that's one way it's been easy to connect. The other is So I do teach, while I'm not a professor, I do teach at Stanford,
Mm-hmm.
two classes. One, racial equity and energy, and the
Mm,
other, quest for an inclusive clean energy economy. And I co-teach these two classes because I do it remote, and there's a faculty member that is in person there.
yeah.
And we have guest lecturers. And so literally I find people that are doing some awesome things, and I invite
Mm,
them to speak at Stanford, and that is how I make those
right.
connections.
That's
Right?
why I
Like
started podcast. That's why I started
there you go.
podcast.
There you
Yeah.
go, right? And so it's the same kind of thing where it's just like, that is one vehicle to get to people who otherwise are like, you sound cool, but I'm too busy, right?
Right.
Like,
Oh,
oh
I
no,
can come talk at Stanford. You go.
yeah,
They love. Everyone
yeah,
wants to go
yeah,
talk at
and we pay
Stanford.
them for it too.
That's right.
Yeah, we don't be like, oh, we're Stanford. This is what happens a lot at places like Stanford, where they're like, oh, we're Stanford. You should just be happy to be able to speak here.
Yeah.
In fact, the business school is not allowed to pay people.
That's crazy.
Crazy.
Yo, listen. I'm about to get in trouble, but I'm gonna say it anyway. Where I work, we had a Black History every year. These schools they want somebody to come talk Black History Month, right?
Hmm.
So they asked the guy who was chair of our Black Chamber of Commerce, one of our Black Chambers of Commerces, to come speak. And so I hit him up afterwards. I was like, "Yo, did you get an honorarium?" He was like, "No." I was like, "Did you ask?" He was like, "No." I was like, "Next time, ask." But then I go talk to the people in the business. I'm like, "Yo, y'all didn't pay them no money." I was like, "Nah, we just don't do that." And I'm like, "That's wrong. We're not even elite like that to just having people come and not pay them that. Like he's not gaining any social status from coming to
No.
talk where I work. And I'm not hating on where I work. It's a great place. It ain't Stanford, and Stanford should be paying people to come talk
Yeah,
in
and
his school. That's
Stanford should be paying
ridiculous.
people.
That's ridiculous.
And the theory behind it is funny because the theory behind it is fundamentally um racial, like economic and racially based, right? The theory behind it is you're not going to pay someone like a Bezos or someone like that because they got more money than God, right? So what does it matter for they'll
Yeah,
if they're going to do it, they're going to do it
we'll
because
do
of
it. They're not
they're going to just
motivated
do
by
it.
the money.
But they've never thought to want to invite people who don't have money, who don't already have that, who's doing work on the
Facts.
ground.
Mm,
And so because of that, like that, it just shows that the creation of that, it shows the limitation of their thinking and how
absolutely.
that's being breaking up because
Yeah.
business school students, I give them credit. Some of them were my students, and they're calling and bringing environmental justice leaders into this space. And one of the things they're big on is like, how are we going to invite this environmental justice leader to speak about stuff that none of us really know about, but that is critical to and interesting, and not pay them any money,
It's crazy.
right? Like,
It's
and so
crazy.
so this is, for us, it was very important for us to be paying honorariums for the folks speaking, and to get people who like will talk real to the students
Yeah.
and be honest and brutally honest with what the realities are, what the challenges are, and I think we've been really successful in that.
Yeah. One of the things that speaking about money, I've done like a ton of podcasts with people who are like into business and things like that. And we hear this a lot, even on podcasts and all that stuff about the lack of funding.
Hmm.
And was it like venture capitalist angel investment into black owned businesses getting like less than 1% or
Hmm.
whatever of that. So how are you able to raise money to do? Are you bootstrapping? Are you crowdsourcing? Like how are you getting it done on the money side of things? Like have you found like an altruistic like is there venture capital for social entrepreneurship that isn't here's the thing. Here's what I really want to ask, right? So we think about social entrepreneurship, and I think there's tons. I think there's tons, maybe not tons, but there's a lot of funders out there for people who want to do social entrepreneurship as long as you're a nonprofit.
Hmm.
What I very rarely see is people who want to do give money for specifically for social entrepreneurship that is for profit. So I'm assuming that Gemini Energy Solutions is for profit and not
Hmm.
nonprofit.
Correct.
So like, how are you able to find the venture capital or the investors to invest in your business?
So that is It's a great question. To answer your question, so far we've been bootstrapping, but
Mm,
I've come to the realization that bootstrapping isn't going to get us to scale
yeah.
at the pace that we at the time in the time that we need to. So I've actually started, you know, that conversation and working and having conversations with investors. And I want to bring up that the same percentage of black companies that are getting funded by VCs is around the same percentage of black grad students in the engineering department, School of Engineering at Stanford. Right?
Yeah.
It's below 1%.
Yeah.
And Stanford, Silicon Valley, that this isn't a coincidence, right?
Yeah.
That a lot of this is relationship based. But it's also language based.
Mm,
I don't know about you, but doing a PhD, it was like you had to basically learn a new language,
yeah.
right? And part of them saying yes to your PhD was that you learned that language and was able to operate in how you talked about your work in
Yep.
that language. And the VC space is the same thing,
Makes
you know,
sense.
and that is, I'm like, I got two kids now, man. It was it was hard enough to do the PhD with no kids. Now I got two kids
Yeah.
and I got to learn another
A whole
language.
nother language. Yeah.
I'm trying to learn German right now. I don't need to learn BC,
Yeah.
but um and so that is a fundamental challenge and barrier, right? Like people are listening for certain things, how you say certain things, what you talk about certain
Yeah.
things, for them to determine whether that's something they want to invest in, whether you have the right stuff. And those things do not often align with the solutions that we see as social entrepreneurs.
Yeah.
um, for me, I was the only US based solution to win the MIT Solves Global Climate Challenge.
Okay.
And this is essentially they put this challenge in different categories. Climate was one of them for social entrepreneurship.
Mm,
And I was the only US solution to win. There's five or six other winners across the globe. And one of the things that I'm seeing there is there's a lot of people who want to talk about this, right? Who love
yeah.
the idea of this, but it's a slow process to get the money, even after winning something like that,
Yeah.
right? It opens doors to conversations,
Yeah.
but I haven't got any money yet, right?
Mm,
And maybe when this comes out, that would have changed. I'm hoping that is the case,
yeah.
but it has been a relationship building. The fact that I went to Stanford really helps. I know people in the VC space,
Yeah.
right? That I went to school with, where I'm like, hey, can you give me a warm introduction to this company?
Yeah.
Like that is something I have that other people don't have. So I do have an easier route to it now that I'm working towards it. But you know, there's there's a fundamental issue of the language of VCs, how the formulas they see as what will be successful, and the fact that as soon as you start talking about communities of color as target audiences, they think that that y- that you can't be scalable, or
Right. Yeah.
and not that you just can't be scalable, and um, that you only work with them,
Yeah.
not that you have the ability to work with them plus everybody
But
else.
else. Yeah. Yeah. I so it's crazy. Like I'm not a tech person. Like my area is physical education. I'm not tech. Um but I went to Afrotech a little bit these past few
Hmm.
days. Yo, there's a sister that went to A&T. Her name is Shelly Omi Bell. She goes by Omi Bell. And
Mm.
she like started Black Girl VC or whatever.
Oh
She's like,
wow.
listen, like you gotta connect with her. I don't know her that well. I just gave it an Aggie Pride when she was up there on stage. But
I love it.
but but what I'm saying is like she was just she was dropping nuggets about like the
Hmm.
language piece, about the connection. Like there's a thing that she said. She was like, when somebody who's a VC or an angel investor or whatever says, how can I help? She was saying, she was like, oh, I need you to volunteer for this. I need you to be on this panel to judge. She was like, when that person says that, they actually want to know how much money you need.
Hmm.
And she was like going through her process. She wasn't putting that together.
Hmm.
So this lends to my next question, right? And my next question is about the communities that you've been able to cultivate so far, to support what you're doing. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be people who are in, engineering or in tech, but like what does your community of support look like that keeps you going in business right now?
Yeah. Um, so I moved to DC from California in the middle of the pandemic,
Mm.
and my homegirl, Dr. Reagan Patterson, professor at UCLA, had also moved the same month as I did. And so we're
Mm.
in DC. We both coming
Okay.
from California. She was at Berkeley, I was at Stanford. And we said, we got to create a community.
Mm.
Like, we don't know people here like that. We got to create a community. So we actually created a wind down and had it
Oh,
every second and fourth Thursday for the past
yeah.
18 months now. And so, like, those folks are people that work at the EPA, work at the DOE, work in nonprofit space, but focus on energy, environment, and equity. And so
Wow.
that's one way that has been, that's kind of that community that we built together has been one of the examples. And we actually started an organization, Furthering Relationships in Energy and Environment, Black, Freebie.
Mm.
And so that is one way that I'm kind of building community with people who are in this space, who care about equity, and so we're moving in that way. Um, you know, for me, it is maintaining relationships that I've had through from A&T.
Yeah.
Uh, Dr. Destiny Knock, professor at Carnegie Mellon, Dr. Tony Reams, who's tenured now at University of Michigan, but is
Yeah.
currently working at the Department of Energy.
Yeah.
And so, like, talking with them, engaging with them, and has been really great for me, and just like keeping things moving in my head, keeping confidence going. And then I got a whole kind of community of just business folks,
Yeah.
in particular Black business folks, and most of them I met through the Black Engineer of the Year Awards, BEA conference, which is held every year. And Dr. Tyrone Taborn, and his organization has been, putting that on for some almost 40 years now.
Wow.
And you go there and it's just thousands of engineers, thousands of entrepreneurs, Black folks who are just there and engaging. And so a lot of folks that I met there were like, you should start your own company, right?
Mm.
And then so there's all these different points of my life
Yeah.
that I've met people and just held on to them.
Yeah.
And by doing so, it helps when you get tired, you get kind of disillusioned, you get just kind of um, you know like you want to just drop the ball,
Yeah.
right? You're just like, you know what, I can I've done enough, or I've tried enough. And having these conversations, being around these people, re-energizes me, gives me more of that motivation, and also, you know reminds me that I'm not doing this by myself,
That's
that I'm
right.
not in this in a vacuum, as you put
Yeah.
it.
So I should have asked this earlier, but I gotta ask. And in my mind, I call it the magic school bus. Can you talk about the magic school buses? Um, because I think that was like the most I don't want to say it was quirky. It was like the coolest thing that I read in a slide deck. What is the magic school bus? And you know what I'm talking about. What's the magic school bus? Oh, you on mute, I think.
Yeah, whoopsie, I'm muting myself.
Oh,
I was
okay.
laughing too hard while you were
Oh, okay.
talking.
Okay. Okay.
um, so wait, you're talking about in my slides where I talk about the school bus initiative.
Yes. Yes.
So there's been a huge push recently in certain circles for electric school buses.
Mm.
And unfortunately, the federal government, I think, just passed $10 billion or something for that, even though I think the ask was for 100 billion or something. So, like,
Mm.
$10 billion sounds like a lot until you realize that they asked for 100 billion,
100. Yeah.
right? But my so what we're doing at Gemini is we're saying, hey, there may be an opportunity for partnership between schools and community anchors, where the the community anchor helps purchase the school bus, right, for the school,
Yeah.
and then they get the revenue generation of the school bus charging at their site,
Wow.
right? So all of a sudden we start having where school districts, they're going to pay for fuel, right? Right now they're paying for gasoline,
Yeah.
and when they get electric school bus, they're going to pay for electricity.
That's right.
Where is that money going to?
Right.
Is it going to large or corporation, or is it going back into the community that that the children that they're teaching and learning, are teaching and educating
That's right.
live? And so
Mm.
I see there's this great opportunity here, and so that's one of the things that we're exploring, having conversations with folks, really in several parts of the country.
Word. I just want to ask that because it stood out to me, the Magic School Bus. Um, so I know we talked about your community of support, and so I want to ask this question. When we hear about funding or support, financially supporting Black businesses,
Mhm.
we hear about angel investments, we hear about VC, we hear about pitch competitions. But how can like a regular person, like, can a regular person invest in what you're doing almost like the way that you could invest in, what did you call it? It's the
The
hub,
clean
right?
energy hub,
The clean
yeah.
energy hub. Like how do you like how do I guess there's two things, right? I guess one thing is investing in the clean energy hub. That could be one
Mhm.
part. But then is there also a part where you could invest in Gemini Solutions overall? Like how could like if I
Yeah.
wanted to make a donation, I want to give, like I'm not a millionaire. Like I might be able to get $5,000, right?
Mhm.
Or less. Like how could someone invest in what you're doing right now to support what you're doing?
Yeah, so there's mechanisms called crowdfunding, right? That exist, but what they don't tell you is you have to have a certain level of revenue each
Yeah.
month before they say yes, you can be on our platform.
Mm.
So that's one thing we're working towards right now, is to getting at that revenue threshold that they have for us to be able to be on those
Oh,
platforms so people can give money more easily,
right.
right? Because there are the FCC rules and things around investment in companies, and are you a certified investor and all these things. So it gets complicated. But you know, people can invest in my company right now, and they it turns into equity when we do our Series A round.
Mm.
Um, and something that I really want to get to, that we are not there yet, but we really want to get to, is make it where people can invest in a clean energy hub anywhere, right? So like a platform that allows them to say, hey, I want to invest in, I know
Ah,
that my money will go into putting a clean energy hub in one of these communities that are like mine.
right.
And maybe my community already has one, or maybe it doesn't. And I'm going to be trying to get it to mine, but I also want to just put money into it and get revenue back, right?
Right.
And so I'm really want to explore how, folks can do that, how students can put in $5 or $5 a month or something like that, and then when they
Yeah.
graduate, um, they got maybe they're getting $10,000 a year just from
Yeah.
clean energy dividends because they put in that money as small amounts over time. So like
Yeah.
this kind of wealth generation, wealth
Right.
building are systems that we really need to have in place during this clean energy transition, because
Right.
trillions of dollars are going to be coming through.
A lot of money. Yeah.
Trillions of dollars are going to be coming through to transform the whole country. We
Right.
need to make sure that we aren't, not only are we obtaining the technology that other people are attaining, but that we have part ownership in it,
That's
so
right.
that all those trillions of dollars are coming into our pockets.
Yeah. Yeah. I almost think about it like I have this app called Fundrise, and it's a
Mm,
REIT. It's a REIT. It's like a REIT. That's what they call it in real estate, but it's basically
yes,
like a,
yeah.
a 401k, whatever. I just look, $100 a month just goes in there, and I bought apartments in Los Angeles,
Yeah,
a
yeah,
small percentage of it, and that's kind of like what I'm thinking. Like if you
absolutely.
get the app set up or whatever to be, I could buy 2% of a hub in South Carolina, even though I live in San Antonio, Texas. That's
Mhm.
that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Um, so normally, well, I don't want to say normally because we kind of changed up the format of Entrepreneurial Appetite. We should just focus on books, right? And so um we still want to kind of stay true to those origins. And so my final question is going to be like, what books are you reading, or what books have you read that have inspired you, keep you going, or that you would suggest for our listeners to read? And it could be as technical as you want. It could be your favorite textbook from undergrad or your master's degree, or article that you read at Stanford about clean energy solutions. What's on your reading list?
So I gotta say, I haven't sat down and opened and read a book since I had to read articles for my PhD. But I
Wow.
do. So like I say, I used to read. I used to get in trouble for school for reading. Like I used
Mm,
to love reading,
wow.
and the PhD ruined that for
It was
me.
that bad?
But I do audiobooks. I
Okay, that
do audio.
counts. That counts.
So
That counts.
I'll throw out a few things. One, um, it's not really a book, but a podcast that I've been listening to recently. It helps my kid fall asleep.
Mhm.
My little infant, 3 month old. We walk around and listen to it, and he falls asleep, and then I just stay and listen to it more while he's sleeping.
Yeah.
And that is the Think 100% the Coolest Show,
Okay.
and that's by Reverend Yearwood, and it's all about environmental justice and the 100%, so clean energy, 100% clean energy, and how
Yeah.
environmental justice and that are intertwined, and to get to 100% we need environmental justice, right?
Yeah.
And so been loving that. Quite frankly, I don't read a lot in my industry. What I
Mm.
do is I read sci-fi and fantasy books.
Yeah.
I have a whole list of audibles. Me and my wife just sit and just binge on different fantasy books. Uh, Authors like Brandon Sanderson.
Let me ask this question.
Yes, please, please, please.
So do you think reading science fiction is more helpful than reading your industry books? Because like think about like Jules Verne's, what was it 10,000 Leagues Under the Sea?
Mm,
Was that joint was written before the submarine existed. You know what I'm saying?
mm,
Like the submarine didn't didn't wasn't created in some lab. It was created in this science fiction writer's
yeah, yeah.
imagination, right? And so do you read these fantasy books or these sci-fi books for like ideas about what the world could be and how that intersects with your business and what you're trying to create?
No. And if I sit back and think about it, there may be ways that it has helped me,
Yeah,
but for me, really, it's a way to break away.
I understand.
The space I'm working in is the intersection of climate disaster, right? Like we are already seeing the small parts of that with the droughts,
Yeah.
the hurricanes, the floodings, right? It's only going to get worse and more
Mm,
frequent. So I understand the science about what's coming for humanity,
yeah.
right? And I also see how people are so still willfully like ignoring it,
Yeah.
and keeping hold to their racist ideologies or their kind of perceptions of what people want or what people don't want. And so I'm like in the midst of all this trying to battle and say, hey, look, we need to change or
Yeah.
else it's going to get really bad really quickly.
Really bad.
And so for me, sci-fi and fantasy is like just put my mind away from it for a little bit
Yeah.
and go into a new world, experience that new world, um, the humor, all the light nature of it, as the battle, the space battles, and all these things that, quite frankly, implies that we were successful.
Right.
Right,
Right.
like the fact that these worlds exist, like these futures exist where there's space battles to be had, says that we were successful in combating climate change.
Yeah. Makes
And
sense.
so that's really for me is just to have a mental break away from kind of that daily struggle of the current realities that we exist in.
All right, Dr. Kinslow, thank you for taking this time to speak with us. My first time seeing you ever. Hopefully, if I ever get to DC, I'll crash one of your wind downs and learn a little
Yes,
bit more about
absolutely.
environmental justice and all that good stuff. Thank you for taking the time to be with
Appreciate you,
us.
Dr. Clark.
Aggie Pride.
Aggie
And
Pride.